Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're wrestling with one of the most fundamental and frankly one of the most exhausting human feelings.
Hmm.
That deep, cold dread that comes with vulnerability and the constant internal performance required just to be yourself out in the world.
It really is. It's that conviction that to share who you really are feels, well, profoundly dangerous.
Yeah.
It's like this invisible wall we build between our inner experience and, our outer presentation. And this isn't just about being shy.
Yeah.
It's a core psychological problem
Yeah.
that, it underlies everything from daily social anxiety
Hmm.
to really deep-seated existential issues.
And we've assembled a pretty comprehensive stack of sources today. We're pulling the raw threads from emotional testimonials. We're going deep into classic existential literature.
And then we're going to bring in the more rigorous analytical frameworks.
Right, like self-discrepancy theory, Jungian psychology, and Eric Fromm to kind of translate this feeling of chaos into something we can actually understand.
So our mission here is to give you a blueprint. We need to unpack the psychological mechanics behind that belief that to share and be truly known feels dangerous.
Okay.
And then we're going to identify the formal frameworks from these self-discrepancy models that map internal pain to the whole process of individuation that really chart a viable path toward authentic selfhood
Yeah.
and real connection.
Okay, let's start where the discomfort begins, right? In the gut. We have a testimonial that describes the feeling of living life constantly behind glass, never trusting others with vulnerability, and the resulting rotten feeling that just pervades every social interaction. I think that image behind glass, it just perfectly captures it.
It really does.
That desperate need to connect while being at the same time terrified of being seen.
It's an incredibly painful place to exist. And that source, it highlights the profound difficulty of even trying to heal emotional wounds when, you feel like you've been brainwashed into thinking being myself and speaking was wrong. I mean, if your authentic self is equated with error or danger, the only rational defense is to suppress it, to deploy a false self.
And that profound fear of exposure, that internal belief that being seen is the same as being wrong. That's not a modern invention, is it?
Not at all.
We see this dynamic perfectly illustrated in literature. I'm thinking specifically of the existential novel No Longer Human.
Yes, through the protagonist, Yozo Oba. Yozo's narrative isn't just a story. It's really an extensive case study in what we call existential isolation.
Right.
He felt this intense disconnect from what he saw as normal society. And that feeling, it compelled him to become an expert observer of human behavior so he could develop a false self, purely as a protection mechanism.
So his entire social life becomes this high-stakes performance. He's just constantly calculating, constantly adapting his expressions and reactions to what he thinks society wants from him in that exact moment.
Exactly. He puts on the mask of the jester or, the agreeable fool. And while he achieves external social success, people like him, they find him charming or funny, the internal paradox is just agonizing.
He must feel completely detached.
Completely. The connection others feel with him is utterly superficial, which leaves him in this perpetual state of anxiety. He's constantly afraid he'll be exposed as a fraud if he ever drops the act.
Which leads to Yozo's really devastating conclusion about society. He comes to believe that anyone who's gained acceptance has merely succeeded almost completely in hoodwinking people.
Yes. That's the tragic, isolating mindset of someone who's fully committed to the false self. The belief that deception is the only way to be accepted.
The psychological cost must be enormous.
It is. And to move from, the subjective story of Yozo to a more formal psychological map of that distress, we can bring in self-discrepancy theory.
Okay.
This theory helps us formally chart the internal tensions that create the need for that false self in the first place.
So let's get into the mechanics here. This theory, it identifies different versions of the self, right?
Yeah.
And the gap between them is what causes the pain.
That's right.
Yeah.
You have the actual self, the attributes you believe you currently have.
Okay, that's me right now.
Right. And then you have two self-guides. The ideal self, who you hope to be, your aspirations, and the ought self, who you believe you should be, your duties, your obligations.
Okay.
And when your actual self doesn't line up with one of those guides, that discrepancy creates negative emotion.
So how does this map onto the false self? It sounds a little complex, but I think that distinction, between the ideal and the ought, that's got to be crucial for you, the listener, to grasp.
It is, absolutely. The source material highlights two distinct conflicts. First, there's the actual own versus ideal own discrepancy.
Okay, what's that?
That's when your current reality doesn't match your own internal hopes. You feel like you're failing to reach your potential.
And the emotions there are.
They're dejection-related. Disappointment, dissatisfaction, low self-esteem. That feeling of unfulfilled desires. This specific gap is uniquely associated with a feeling of depression.
That makes perfect sense. If you're busy masking who you aren't doing the work to become the person you actually want to be. It's like a passive failure against your own future.
Exactly. But then there's the second conflict, which often drives the anxiety of the false self.
Which is?
The actual own versus ought-other discrepancy. This is when your actual self doesn't match what you believe others, society, parents, partners think you should be.
So this is all about external expectation.
Precisely. And the emotions here are much more volatile, aren't they? They are agitation-related.
Fear, anxiety.
Fear, anxiety, guilt, yes. It's that constant internal panic of, I am not what they expect me to be, and I'm going to be punished or rejected for it. The false self is basically the frantic attempt to bridge that gap by just performing the ought self in public.
And the discomfort has a magnitude, right? You mentioned the concept of availability. Can you break that down in simple terms?
Think of availability as how often and how intensely you're thinking about that gap.
Got it.
It's not just the size of the gap between your actual and ideal self. Is how often that discrepancy is sort of activated in your mind. If you're constantly dwelling on your failures or your unmet obligations, the availability is high and the discomfort is intense.
That's a powerful map for that internal failure loop. But of course, this isn't just an internal problem.
No.
If the false self is built to satisfy external expectations, we have to pivot and look at the external pressures that drive this in the first place. Which brings us to Erich Fromm's critique of the marketing orientation.
Yes. Fromm argued that in modern capitalist societies, the individual is kind of forced to see themselves as a commodity.
Something to be marketed.
Exactly. Not as a unique, essential being. Our value becomes based on how well we adjust ourselves to ever-changing demands, the fashion, external opinions, just to stay valuable or employable.
Okay. I think we all feel that pressure today, especially with social media, where everyone is like optimizing their profile or crafting the perfect resume.
Or presenting this impossibly curated lifestyle. The marketing orientation is hyper-present.
Yeah.
And it is pervasive. When your self-worth depends on this external validation, it just breeds this profound insecurity. If the market shifts, your value shifts. You're never stable. And in the system, it directly demands the development of a persona, or what Jung called false wrappings, just to succeed.
So the false self is the direct offspring of the marketing orientation. It's a survival tool in a society that values performativity over authenticity.
Precisely. The false self functions like a mask designed to get that external validation.
Yeah.
But the connection it makes is inherently fragile.
And the relief is only momentary.
Only momentary. Because the true self isn't involved, the mask offers no lasting comfort or a real sense of belonging. And that's why the individual stays stuck in this constant draining anxiety, just terrified of the mask cracking.
And the tragic irony is that the very thing the mask is supposed to prevent, that fear of isolation, it actually gets intensified. Figures like Yozo Oba, they end up using others not for genuine friendship, but, as the source says, to flail at others to avoid drowning in the dark abyss of isolation.
Relationships become tools.
Tools of self-preservation, not sources of sustenance.
And that desperation, it just underscores the absolute necessity of
balance.
Of balance, exactly.
Yeah.
We've seen the pain of isolation and the futility of the mask. The solution isn't simply choosing self over society, but integrating both.
Yeah.
It's a required duality.
This is where the source material gives us such a powerful, almost poetic analogy for that. It argues that fulfillment requires understanding two motions at the same time.
Right.
On one hand, there has to be brotherly love, a wholeness of humanity, so collective connection and empathy.
But, and this is the key, the collective need has to be balanced with pure, separate individuality, separate and proud as a lion or a hawk.
Right.
Fulfillment lies in embracing both belonging and distinctness.
The sources suggest we have to learn to act in concert with man, but also separately and distinctly, apart from every other man, single and self-responsible.
And proud with unquenchable pride. The goal is to integrate both so you can live freely and without fear.
That internal balancing act, that lifelong task, is exactly what Carl Jung called individuation, right?
It is. He defined it as the process of psychological development that fulfills the unique individual qualities that are already given.
So it's not about finding yourself out in the chaos. It's more about fulfilling the self that was already there, just buried under the persona.
That's a great way to put it. You're not building a self from scratch. You're fulfilling the one already present. And the process requires this difficult twofold differentiation.
Okay, what's the first part?
First, you have to separate from those external social constraints, the marketing orientation, societal expectations, the social mask. That's the hard work of, deprogramming.
And the second differentiation.
It's separating from the suggestive power of inner primordial images.
Okay, that's very Jungian language.
It is. It just means the unconscious, generalized patterns, the instincts, archetypes, the inherited psychic stuff that guides us but doesn't define our uniqueness. The goal is to move beyond all that collective material, external and internal, to become the definite, unique being he in fact is.
So if the goal is to become this integrated, unique being, what does that do to your relationships?
The sources are really clear on this. True connection requires self-relatedness first.
Absolutely.
You can't truly relate to others until you're related to yourself. You can't share what you haven't fully formed or accepted.
And that self-acceptance is the foundation for what Erich Fromm called productive love.
The positive expression of that individuality.
Exactly. And it's so crucial to understand that productive love isn't just a feeling you have toward, say, one romantic partner.
It sounds much broader than that.
It is. It's an attitude, an orientation of character which determines the relatedness of a person to the world as a whole. It shifts your entire existence from receiving validation, which the false self craves, to giving life and fostering growth. It's an active state. So it's an orientation toward life itself. And Fromm, he detailed 4 basic elements that make this up, right? Moving it from an abstract idea to an actual behavior.
He did. Those elements are care, responsibility, respect, and knowledge.
Okay.
So care means actively wanting the other person or the world to live and grow. Responsibility means voluntarily responding to their needs, which is different from duty.
Right. It's a choice.
It's a choice. Respect means accepting them as they are, without trying to dominate or exploit them. And knowledge is the deep understanding you need for effective care, seeing the other person beyond their surface, which requires you to know yourself deeply first.
So productive love is the antidote to that flailing at others we talked about earlier. It replaces desperation with this active, engaged presence.
It's the integrated individual operating within the greater humanity.
Yeah.
And this brings us right back to the start.
That fear of being truly known.
Yes. We've seen the anxiety, we've mapped the internal failure, we've looked at the external pressures.
So what's the ultimate takeaway for the person who feels that rotten dread of exposure?
The ultimate requirement is, it's an act of courageous will. Individuals have to resolutely confront their anxiety about feeling existentially isolated instead of retreating into their false selves. The fear is real, but the only path to lasting comfort and authentic connection is finding a truth which is true for you internally, not what society has decreed.
This deep dive has taken us on quite a journey. We moved from the pain of living behind glass through the psychological mechanics of self-discrepancy and the pressures of the external marketplace, and then we landed on the necessity of embracing this dual existence through individuation.
And to reiterate the central insight, the false self might get you momentary social validation, but it guarantees a constant state of anxiety. It prevents you from ever experiencing the deeper comfort of productive love.
Yeah.
True freedom and true belonging are only found in that lifelong task of becoming your own unique being.
So if the primary task of the individual is to give birth to his or self, and if virtue is about the level of productiveness an individual had achieved, we want to leave you with one final question to chew on.
Something to put into practice this week.
What is one thing you are currently doing? A choice, a thought, an action, to act separately and distinctly, proud as a hawk, rather than just conforming silently to the collective norm?
A really powerful question.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the false self and the path to authenticity. We hope this knowledge serves you well. We'll see you next time.